Listen closely, because what I'm about to share may explain a deeply unsettling pattern you've begun to notice within yourself. You've felt it, haven't you? That odd moment when someone is confiding in you, revealing their rawest emotions, and instead of feeling their pain, you feel absolutely nothing. No sadness, no resonance, just a strange, distant observation, like you're watching a scene in a film you've seen too many times before. That hollow space where compassion used to be, it's not fatigue, it's not resilience, and it's definitely not you finally learning boundaries. What's occurring within you is far more troubling than most people dare to acknowledge. Carl Jung saw this coming. His warnings, often misinterpreted or ignored, speak directly to this inner fracture. But before we explore the darker implications, let me say this. If you've always been the one who feels too much, if you've carried other people's pain like it was your own burden, if you've worn the title of emotional caretaker so long you don't even know who you are without it, subscribe to our channel. This is not surface-level psychology. We're diving deep where most dare not go. Drop a comment below. Have you ever found your empathy just gone? In a moment where it should have mattered most? You're not alone, and this is far more serious than anyone's told you. Let's begin with a key clarification. The term empath isn't one Carl Jung actually coined. He never used that word. Jung wrote in depth about psychological functions like feeling versus thinking, and described how some individuals are naturally attuned to the emotional states of others. But the modern idea of an empath? That's a contemporary construct, built loosely on Jungian concepts fused with other psychological models. Why does this matter? Because to understand what's happening to you, we need to marry what Jung genuinely observed with modern interpretations. Jung did, however, write something that should rattle every sensitive person to their core. In his work on the shadow, on psychological compensation, and on a principle he called enantiodromia, the idea that any extreme, when taken too far, flips into its opposite, he left behind a trail of breadcrumbs leading us to this very crisis. You must understand what's truly happening in your psyche when your empathy evaporates. Jung wrote that when one psychological function becomes overly dominant, too one-sided, the unconscious retaliates, often violently. The more extreme the conscious attitude, he said, the more primitive and dangerous the unconscious reaction becomes. Now apply this to your life. You've lived through your feeling function in overdrive. For years, maybe decades, you've absorbed others' emotions. You've cried tears that weren't even yours. You've taken on their anxiety, their grief, their confusion, as though it belonged to you. You've become the emotional sponge, the counselor, the confidant. But Jung warned, the psyche cannot hold a one-sided state indefinitely. Eventually it rebels. And when it does so not with grace, but with eruption. Think back to the last time it happened. Really happened. Someone close to you was in pain. Maybe they were struggling with depression, going through a breakup, questioning the meaning of their life. 6 months ago, it would have wrecked you. You'd have felt every word in your bones, probably cried with them, carried their anguish into your dreams. But this time, nothing. You said all the right things. You offered comfort, maybe even mimicked the right expressions. But inside, it was vacant. There was no sorrow, no connection, just a hollow silence. And perhaps more terrifying than anything, you heard yourself think, enough. I don't care. Everyone has problems. Why should yours matter more than mine? That thought jolted you. It horrified you, because it felt so foreign, so opposite of who you believe yourself to be. But what if I told you this isn't you becoming cruel? What if this is your psyche's desperate bid to survive? That's enantiodromia at work. Jung describes psychic energy as flowing like a river. If that river is forced to flow only in one direction, say toward constant empathy, it eventually turns back with force. Your empathy hasn't vanished. It's transformed, morphed into its shadow opposite as a protective mechanism. Here lies Jung's darkest insight. In his analysis of psychological inflation and identification, he warned that when someone identifies too deeply with a single trait, when their entire self-image becomes, "I am the one who feels," or "I'm the emotional anchor for others," they create a rigid persona. The persona is the social mask we wear, the role we play. But when that mask hardens too tightly, when there's no room for other parts of the self to exist, something internal has to break. Jung found that people who live this way, people who suppress parts of themselves in service of a single identity, don't erase those parts. Those suppressed traits retreat into the unconscious. They fester, strengthen, and one day erupt. When that happens, they emerge not as quiet reminders, but as fierce, unruly forces. The moment you lost your empathy, that cold disconnection, it wasn't the problem. It was the result of years of imbalance. The problem started when you made empathy your identity, when your worth became tied to your ability to feel for others. Jung cautioned us, when we fuse with any quality, even a positive, one we abandon the rest of who we are. And the abandoned parts? They don't disappear. They become autonomous and powerful in the dark, waiting for the moment to reclaim control. So what exactly is happening when this shift occurs? Let's go deeper. Jung wrote about a concept called participation mystique, a term originally borrowed from anthropology. It describes a psychological state where the boundaries between self and other become so blurred, so entangled, that they practically vanish. For individuals with an overdeveloped feeling function, empaths, as we now refer to them, this boundary collapse is not only likely, it's habitual. You've lived most of your life enmeshed in other people's emotional realities. You felt their pain as your own, their sadness as your burden, their trauma as your responsibility. You saw this as compassion, as deep care, as the very best part of yourself. But Jung saw the hidden danger. He observed that when we cannot distinguish our emotions from someone else's, when we dissolve entirely into another's experience, we don't actually help them. We lose ourselves. And the unconscious, brilliant and ruthless in its wisdom, does not allow that loss to go unchecked. When your psyche detects that you're on the verge of emotional self-destruction, it acts. It intervenes in a way that feels brutal but is actually protective. It shuts down your empathy, not forever, but long enough to save your system. Like a body cutting off circulation to a limb to preserve the whole. That hollow, cold space you're feeling, that's not the failure of your compassion. It's your unconscious pulling the emergency brake. This is what I interpret as Jung's most chilling warning. He wrote that the unconscious does not care about your moral ideals, your social identity, or your need to be the good person. It only cares about balance. When it senses danger, when one part of the psyche dominates at the expense of all else, it acts to restore equilibrium. And that restoration? It often looks like psychological sabotage, but it's actually survival. And it gets even more complicated. Jung spent much of his career exploring the shadow, the part of us that houses everything we reject, disown, or refuse to see in ourselves. For the empath, the shadow is often filled with traits they find horrifying: indifference, selfishness, detachment, even cruelty. These are the qualities you've spent your whole life running from. You've worked tirelessly to prove you're not that. You're kind, you're understanding, you care. That Jung taught that the more we deny these aspects, the more power they gain in the unconscious. They don't just go away, they build force. So when they finally emerge, They do so with vengeance. That's what you're experiencing now. Shadow eruption. The cold, analytical, unfeeling part of you that you've exiled for years is no longer willing to stay hidden. And because it's never been acknowledged, never been consciously integrated, it shows up in its rawest, most primitive form. It's not measured or wise. It's ruthless. Instead of simply establishing healthy boundaries, it pushes everyone away. Instead of calmly detaching, it breeds contempt. You don't just pause to care for yourself. You resent others for needing anything from you at all. This is the price of imbalance. When you suppress a part of yourself long enough, it doesn't disappear. It distorts. It festers. And when it returns not as an integrated ally, but as an invading force. Now let's bring this closer to the core of Jung's work on personality. In his theory of psychological types, Jung described the concept of the inferior function, the function that is least developed in your psyche. If you're someone who leads with feeling, who's built their identity around connection, sensitivity, and emotional attunement, then your inferior function is likely thinking. Cold, objective, detached thinking. That part of you exists. It always has. But because it's underdeveloped and buried in the unconscious, when it finally breaks through, it doesn't show up as balanced rationality. It shows up as icy disconnection, harsh judgment, clinical distance. And it tends to emerge at the worst possible times, when you're exhausted, overwhelmed, or emotionally spent. For an empath, this means that precisely when someone needs your compassion most, when they're crying out for connection, is when your capacity to feel vanishes. You find yourself analyzing them like a case study, minimizing their pain, even questioning their motives. Are they just being dramatic? Why are they always in crisis? Thoughts you would never have dared entertain before now feel almost logical. And here's the truly disturbing part. After the initial shock wears off, you might start to enjoy it. You sleep better. You have more energy. You're not constantly pulled into everyone else's emotional orbit. You start focusing on your own goals, your own peace, your own priorities. And then, the most terrifying realization creeps in. What if this is who I really am? That thought, the fear that your empathic self was just an illusion, that the cold detachment is your true nature, is enough to shake your identity to its core. But here's where Jung's brilliance shines brightest. He would say, you're asking the wrong question. It's not about which self is real. It's about understanding that both are. You are not just the empath, and you are not just the detached analyst. You are both, and everything in between. Jung believed the human psyche is not a single, fixed identity, but a dynamic interplay of opposites, feeling and thinking, light and shadow, warmth and coolness, compassion and discernment. The problem arises when you live at one extreme for too long. When you make empathy your religion, detachment becomes the devil. And when that balance finally snaps, detachment doesn't show up as a gentle contrast. It comes as an overcorrection, a psychological backlash. This is enantiodromia in action. Extreme empathy gives way to extreme detachment. Jung saw this pattern in all aspects of human life. Selflessness turning into narcissism, rigid morality collapsing into indulgence, martyrdom transforming into apathy. When you suppress one side of yourself, it doesn't die. It grows in the shadows until it's powerful enough to take the wheel. So what do you do with this? How do you stop bouncing between extremes, between caring too much and not caring at all? Jung's answer wasn't simple. In fact, he rejected simple solutions. He didn't believe in fixing the psyche. He believed in integrating it. He called this process individuation, the lifelong work of becoming whole by consciously embracing all aspects of yourself. even the parts you've rejected. The goal isn't to go back to who you were. That would only restart the cycle. The goal is to evolve into someone new, someone who can hold empathy and detachment in the same breath, someone who can care deeply and protect their boundaries, someone who can say no without guilt and yes without resentment. Imagine being able to sit with someone suffering and not drown in it. Imagine offering support from a grounded, centered place rather than a self-sacrificing one. Imagine knowing when to open your heart and when to close it, not out of fear or reaction, but out of wisdom. That's what integration looks like. That's the real path forward. But here's the truth Jung never sugarcoated. Integration is not easy. It's not comforting. It doesn't feel like a warm bath or a motivational quote. Integration is disruptive. It often begins with crisis, the very kind you might be in right now. The kind where everything you thought you knew about yourself starts to unravel. You're not just losing empathy. You're being invited, dragged even, into a deeper understanding of who you are. And that's painful. Because most of us have built our identities on a foundation that feels noble. I'm the one who helps. I'm the one who cares. But beneath those personas are often old wounds, messages we internalized in childhood, in family dynamics, in culture. Messages that said, you are only lovable when you're useful, when you're selfless, when you take care of others. For many empaths, this is where the story begins. Maybe you grew up with emotionally volatile parents and you learned to soothe them just to feel safe. Maybe you had friends or siblings who depended on your sensitivity and your value came from being their support system. Or maybe adults around you praised you endlessly for your emotional insight, and you mistook that praise for identity. However it started, empathy became more than something you do. It became who you are. And that's where the danger lies. Jung warned that when we become too identified with any one role, we disconnect from the totality of the self. We live behind the mask, the persona, and the rest of us gets buried in the dark. But buried doesn't mean gone. Behind the empath persona lives another self, one that is sometimes selfish, one that wants to be taken care of, not always the caretaker, one that yearns to feel without being responsible for everyone else's emotions. And when that part of you finally surfaces, when you can no longer fake concern, when you feel a terrifying indifference, you panic. But that coldness isn't the end. It's the beginning. The beginning of rebalancing your psyche, of letting the shadow speak, of allowing your full humanity to emerge. This is where individuation truly begins, not by rejecting the shadow, but by integrating it. Not by shoving it back into the basement, but by inviting it into the room and asking, what are you trying to show me? When you ask that question genuinely, without judgment, something starts to shift. That cold, detached feeling that once seemed monstrous begins to take on new shape. It softens just a little. It stops being raw indifference and starts becoming discernment. You begin to understand that not every emotional plea deserves your immediate sacrifice, that not every crisis belongs to you. This isn't about becoming heartless, it's about becoming wise. Jung emphasized that the shadow only remains destructive when it's unconscious, when we repress it, deny it, pretend it doesn't exist. But the moment we bring it into awareness, when we say, yes, I see you, it loses its compulsive grip. It no longer erupts like a volcano. It becomes a choice, a tool. You stop being ruled by your empathy, and you stop fearing your coldness. You begin to navigate both as needed, responding to life instead of reacting from old wounds. Let's put this into a concrete example. Say a friend reaches out, again, spiraling over a problem they've repeated for months. Old you would drop everything, hold space, internalize their emotions, and leave the interaction drained, perhaps even resentful. Shadow erupted you might feel disgusted or entirely indifferent. But the integrated version of you? That version might say, calmly and with clarity, I care about you, but I can't be the person to hold this for you today. That's not cruelty. That's integrity. It's recognizing that empathy is a finite resource, not a badge of honor you wear until it bleeds. It's learning to conserve your compassion for moments when it genuinely matters, for people who truly respect and reciprocate it. Jung called this process the transcendent function, the psyche's innate ability to hold opposites in tension until a new, higher state emerges. Not empathy or detachment, but a third position, integrated awareness. You become someone who can feel and think, who can open your heart and protect it, who can give and say now with equal conviction. This is the path of individuation, not perfection, not purity, but wholeness. And here's something Jung said that many overlook. The shadow is 90% gold. Let that sink in. That coldness you've feared, that selfishness you've judged, that detachment you've resisted, it contains treasure. Not moral failure, not pathology. Treasure. That treasure is everything you've been needing but didn't believe you were allowed to claim. The right to rest, the right to say no, the right to prioritize your own peace over other people's crises. It's your capacity for self-preservation, your ability to discern who actually deserves your energy and who has been quietly draining you for years. Here's a truth that might sting. The people who benefited most from your unchecked empathy are often the very ones who will resist your boundaries the hardest. The ones who guilt you when you pull away. The ones who accuse you of changing or being cold the moment you stop sacrificing yourself for their comfort. But here's what your shadow helps you see. You were never obligated to bleed for them in the first place. When your empathy fades, when that chilling distance sets in, it's not just a psychological shift, it's a revelation. Your unconscious is showing you, without the filter of performance, who has been honoring your emotional labor and who has simply been consuming it. And sometimes that clarity arrives wrapped in anger, contempt, even cruelty. Not because those feelings are the final truth, but because they're the raw truth, unfiltered, unrefined. Jung noted this: the shadow tells the truth, but it often tells it too harshly. So we dismiss it. We flinch. We say, that's not me. But what if the message is real, even if the delivery is rough? What if your coldness is revealing something accurate, something you've been too kind, too exhausted, too afraid to face? This is the moment when many people recoil. They try to shove the shadow back down. They label themselves broken. They rush to get back to their old empathic self. But that just resets the cycle. Empathy, burnout, collapse. Empathy, burnout, collapse. Jung called this neurosis, a substitute for legitimate suffering. The endless anxiety, the emotional fatigue, the guilt over your coldness. These might not be problems to fix, but signs that you've been avoiding a deeper truth. The truth that your empathy, as beautiful as it is, became a prison. That you've been living out a role, not your full self. And now, the walls are cracking. The shadow is knocking. And it's not here to destroy you. It's here to complete you. Let's bring this full circle. You're not losing your empathy. You're rediscovering your wholeness. This terrifying moment, this coldness, this emotional numbness is not the death of your goodness. It's the collapse of a false self. A persona built on pleasing, on overgiving, on equating your value with your usefulness. And now, your psyche is saying, enough. So what happens next? You begin the slow, courageous work of integration. You sit with the discomfort. You resist the urge to label one part of you good and the other bad. You welcome both. You ask the shadow what it's protecting. You listen without trying to silence it. And then you thank it for surviving, for enduring, for showing up when no one else did. Because this is the secret. The most compassionate thing you can do for yourself is stop abandoning yourself. Stop giving from emptiness. Stop performing care when what you need is care. The goal isn't to erase your empathy, it's to wield it consciously. To choose when to open your heart and when to close it, not from fear, but from wisdom. You can be soft and boundaried. You can care deeply and say no. You can feel everything and protect your inner peace. This is what Jung meant by the union of opposites. Not a battle for dominance, but a dance. A dynamic balance where each side tempers the other, where your coldness becomes clarity, not cruelty, and your empathy becomes choice, not compulsion. So if you're standing in that void right now, if you've lost touch with the part of you that used to care, and you're afraid of who you've become, I want you to ask, what if this isn't the worst thing that's happened to me? What if it's the doorway to the most authentic, powerful version of yourself? The version that can love without losing, that can give without guilt, that can rest without shame, that can be everything you are, not just the light but also the dark, not just the warmth but the cool clarity that sees clearly and chooses wisely. You're not broken. You're becoming whole. And if this spoke to you, if it cracked something open inside you, support our journey by liking, sharing, and subscribing to our channel. Let's keep exploring these deep waters together.